Good evening, and I do thank you so much for watching. In our assigned reading for today, we closed out the book of 1 Samuel with the death of Saul, the king, and his sons in the battle with the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. Much of 1 Samuel has been spent watching David's ascendance as a leader in Israel, combined with Saul's downfall, including his jealousy and his hatred for David. Saul really has done everything in his power to thwart the will of God, namely, that is to kill David, the heir apparent to the throne of Israel. And now at the end of the book, suddenly Saul is dead. And we might think that David would be elated by this news, and he might even send a thank you note to the king of the Philistines. Thank you for the battle that ended Saul's life as king. But David doesn't do that. Well, maybe David will write a song, a party song, where people can sing and dance. Well, David will write a song, but it won't be a party song. He writes a funeral song, a dirge, a song of lament. And we're going to read that here in just a few minutes. First, let's recap what we've seen so far in the book of 1 Samuel. Earlier this week in your readings, you saw that David and his men are hiding actually among the Philistines. They're even helping them win some battles. But as the Philistines get ready to clash with Israel, the leaders of the Philistine army, they don't want David anywhere around. They're afraid that he's going to be a turncoat. And so they send David and his little army of misfits to Ziklag. And when they get there, they find the city in ruins. The women and children are gone. And David asks God, should I go and look for the people who've kidnapped our women, who've destroyed our city, who've taken our children captive, and should we whip them? God says yes. And so with the help of a slave, David finds the Amalekite army and he defeats them. He saves the women and the children. Meanwhile, Saul also inquires of the Lord, asking the question, should we go into battle with the Philistines? And the response is crickets. God does not answer because he has rejected Saul as king. Saul goes to the witch of Endor, ordering her to conjure up the late prophet Samuel, and she does. And Samuel says, why have you disturbed my rest? Saul, you know God has rejected you as king, and he is about to hand your kingdom to someone better than you. Tomorrow, you and your sons are going to be with me here in Sheol. Sure enough, that's what happens. Jonathan and his brothers are killed in the battle. Saul is wounded. He turns to his armor bearer, commanding him to kill him. The armor bearer refuses. And so Saul stands his sword against the ground with the blade at his heart, and he falls on it. This is the first suicide in Scripture. The armor bearer sees what the king has done. He does the same thing, and suddenly suicide becomes popular. It's a very sad picture, isn't it? The man handpicked by God to lead his people dies thinking only of himself. The Philistine army finds the bodies, cut off the heads, put the heads in the display of the temple of Dagon, and the bodies they tack to the city walls of Beth-shan. Later on, some brave souls from Jabesh Gilead will steal those bodies and burn them and bury them under an oak tree. Well, David hears the news of Saul's death from an Amalekite mercenary, except the mercenary claims to be the one who killed Saul. He thinks he's scoring some points with David, but he's not. David says to the Amalekite, why were you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed? And David orders the man to be killed. He orders that everyone in Judah should mourn the death of King Saul, and they do. David mourns by writing a song. He orders that every male in Judah be taught to sing this song, and he calls the song of the bow. And you'll see it in tomorrow's reading, in the first chapter of 2 Samuel. beginning in verse 19. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights, how the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not on the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. O mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, nor fields that yield offerings of grain, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life, they were loved and gracious, and in death, they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen. The weapons of war have perished. Despite all the trouble that Saul caused David, trying to kill him, chasing him all over Israel and beyond. When Saul dies, David mourns. David's in tears. His heart is ripped apart because the Lord's anointed is dead. And he writes this lament song. And don't we admire him for doing that? Because it shows us that David's not thinking about himself at all. No, he sees this entire situation through the eyes of God and through the eyes of God's people. What has happened here is a great tragedy. In Luke chapter 19, Jesus draws near to Jerusalem for the last time in his human life. He knows what awaits him there, that he will be rejected, that he will be mocked, and that he will be crucified. But from the mountaintop, as Jesus looks down upon this city, he begins to cry. And understand that he is not weeping for himself at all. No, there's another kind of pain ripping through Jesus as he views the capital city. He's thinking about all these people of Jerusalem. And he cries because he knows that this city with so much rich history is about to reject him. And in about 40 years, this city will be destroyed. As Jesus approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Jesus laments over Jerusalem. And we might think, well, hang on, because really they're just getting what they deserve, right? You kill God in the flesh, you deserve destruction. Jesus came to save those people, and they reject him. They refuse to listen to him. And so they're going to get what they deserve, just like Saul did. And yet David and the son of David, Jesus, weep with broken hearts. Neither of them rejoices in the destruction. And folks, we need to see that this is the very heart of God, that God takes no delight in the destruction of the wicked. God does not rejoice when he pours out his wrath. Now, he is a righteous and just God, and he will pour out his wrath, but he doesn't rejoice in it. He weeps over it. God cries because people refuse to accept the truth and be saved. To sing the song of the bow we're first going to have to get our eyes off ourselves and onto God. We have to see people the way God sees them. Instead of seeing people who are mean and sinful and hateful and depraved human beings who deserve what they get, we need to see people who are imprisoned and ravaged by Satan, the great deceiver, the father of lies. Because that's what God sees. We must see someone desperately in need of love. Because that's what God sees. Singing the song of the bow allows us to pray for our enemies. It allows us to do good to people who are evil to us. Singing the song of the bow will enable us to not seek revenge, but to leave room for the wrath of God. Israel's watching David to see how he's going to react to the news of Saul's death. And his reaction is nothing less than an impressive demonstration of faith. In church, we need to always remember that people are watching us to see how we handle difficult times and difficult people. Our kids, our families, our neighbors, they're all watching us. And when they see us return good for evil, when they see us praying for our enemies, when they see us act in compassion, when we see others suffering, even those who deserve to suffer, that's when people see Jesus living in us. The goal of the Christian life is to look and act like the one we follow. And so let's be Jesus in the world. Have a blessed week.